Thank you for joining us for today's Meet the Maker. Today I am here with Emily, a Geographic Information Systems analyst from Argonne National Laboratory. As part of our Meet the Maker video series, we at Addison Public Library want to highlight people in STEAM-related careers in order to empower all of our patrons to pursue similar careers or just develop a new hobby or gain useful skills. And on that note, Emily, can you describe what a geographic information system analyst is?
First, Sarah, thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I am always really excited to talk about GIS because it is everywhere, but it's not something that people really think about as being everywhere. Geographic Information Systems is the modern day equivalent to cartography or making maps. Um, Years and years ago, it was done, drawing things out by hand, or then, moving on to um, using plastic sheets and things like that. And today, the majority of the work is done on computer. And so a geographic information systems analyst can really do anything with what we call spatial data, which is anything that has an X or Y coordinates, or for students who are maybe a little bit older, anything with the latitude and longitude coordinate associated with it. And nowadays, there are very powerful computer models and tools that let us do analyses with this spatial data. And spatial analyses can be done on all sorts of different topics. I personally chose to work with environmental data in the environmental science division. Before I started working at Argonne, I worked for a local municipality. So I also did GIS there, keeping track of more of the features that are important to a town, keeping track of sidewalk hazards and, the geographically on a map, the, sewer and water main lines, where the, street lines and that sort of infrastructure. GIS can also be used in business, in biology, demographics like the census, epidemiology, construction and surveying, so many different areas. And there are also quite a few variety of jobs within GIS itself. As an analyst at Argonne, I provide information to our sponsors or our clients to help them make decisions about topics ranging from where to build utility scale solar facilities to where archaeological sites might be and everything in between. To me, spatial analysis is important because it helps us visualize the big picture, and it helps us do so, at least in my opinion, in a way that is much more instantaneous than reading through the same information in a table or in an essay or in a report.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that information with us. And I think you mentioned briefly how you are using these maps and this data for clients like related on where to put solar panels. Could you talk a little bit more about how you and your colleagues at Argonne are using these maps and these data?
Yes, one example that I would like to talk about is called Crocus. It's the Community Research on Climate and Urban Science Urban Integrated Field Lab. And that it's a new project. It just got funded by the Department of Energy last fall, and so we're kicking things off. But the whole premise of the project is studying the intersection of like climate change and urban areas, and how urban areas will affect climate change, like actions within urban areas will affect climate change, but then how also climate change will affect urban areas. And it's very fascinating. And we've got a huge group of collaborators working with us, not only from some local colleges and universities, but also some local community organizations. And one way that I've come into play in the project so far and in the proposal process was sort of helping to figuring out what data already exists in the area, in the topic area, especially relating to environmental justice and topics that would impact environmental justice, which, and for people who are not familiar with that term, environmental justice is, it's making sure that people who are, in an underrepresented group, or who don't necessarily have the power in a situation, to make sure that they are not unduly impacted by development, or by really any sort of situation. It comes into play in our work a lot of times when we're talking about development of renewable energy infrastructure, but it comes into play a lot in the Chicago area when you're looking at the the neighborhoods example, where lots of industrial development is. And when you look at the demographics of the folks who live in those neighborhoods, or where there's lots of air pollution, versus the areas that don't have as much air pollution, and the demographics of the folks who live in those areas. So this topic of environmental justice is central to Crocus. And so one of the things that I did was just see what was out there to begin with, looking into lots of resources from the city of Chicago itself, to see what sort of data they've collected. Looked into, for example, the 311 calls that have been reported in flooding, and what areas people have reported serious flooding over the years, using local data from the Nature Conservancy on areas that they've done their own study of flooding and heat impacts, and everything in Cook County. And then just looking at what other agencies are doing. For example, what sort of sensors has the EPA placed in the greater Chicago area in terms of air quality monitoring.
So you work at Argonne National Laboratory, and I love having people who work in laboratories, because a lot of us relate to like sci-fi movies and TV shows. And when we think of laboratories, we think of like earth altering, like new science discoveries, or engineers rushing to build like advanced technology to like defeat the villain. But could you actually describe what like your day-to-day routine is as a GIS analyst?
Yeah, and it's really funny that you say that, because my colleagues and I were having a conversation about that just last week, of like Stranger Things, and when it first launched, there were a couple of news articles out there of like, of all the DOE labs, Argonne's the one that's most like Hawkins National Lab. And there really are some, I don't know, crazy rumors that get started. But I can tell you that my day-to-day routine is pretty uneventful. It's like in a good way, like in that there aren't monsters chasing me down the hallway, like that sort of way. Most of my work is done at a computer. Sometimes that's actually being on site in the office. Sometimes that's working from home. And I will say that, one of the misconceptions out there also is that there's usually like a mad scientist who like works alone in their lab and just does all of this stuff. And the work that my division does is very collaborative. There's hardly, I think, anybody who actually, works alone. Most of our projects are a team, and there's lots of collaboration and back and forth of trying to figure out the best solution. And even though we all have our own, specialty areas, still, that we go off and work on, still coming together and working together as a team. There's very, I'd say at this day and age, very few significant, scientific things happen by just one person having an apple fall on their head.
Yes. So what led you to a job as a Geographic Information Systems analyst, and what kind of educational background do you need?
I think that's a great question, because there are quite a few career opportunities in geographic information systems that a person can do with different levels of education. So I came into the field not on purpose. It was not a linear career path. I think that's also a myth that a lot of people who end up working in STEM, especially at a place like Argonne, that they had a very, set career path from a young age, and, went directly, like knew what they were going to do in high school and went to, college and then grad school and then got their PhD and blah, 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 blah. And it was all a very straight line. And my career was not like that. And there's a growing number of us who don't have, a straight path to getting to our careers. So I was studying environmental science in undergrad, and one of my professors, who was actually a physics professor, but just had an interest in all sorts of things, heard about GIS, and he thought it was, an interesting concept. So he had a small group of us just sort of working independently on trying to get this Trimble GPS unit working and collecting data with it and seeing what we could do. And I enjoyed it, but that wasn't even really what I intended to do with my life. I thought I'd go into maybe environmental education or policy. And one of my friends was actually like, Emily, you really seem to enjoy talking about this map stuff. Why don't you do that? And it sort of just like smacked me in the face that they were correct. What I did was I graduated from my undergrad, and then I moved back home and started going to classes at College of DuPage. So I took classes at College of DuPage for a couple of years, and also started working as an intern at the municipality that I worked at before Argonne. And that really, it cemented a couple of things for me. I really enjoyed doing the mapping work. I enjoyed GIS. I enjoyed working with organizing data and making sure it followed the conventions and would be usable for other people. I enjoyed the creativity of the mapping component. I also really cemented that I would like to keep working in the environmental sciences and not sort of in the community development sector. It's just not my thing. We need people who work in those areas. It's just not personally my thing. So as I was taking classes at COD, I was getting some more and more work experience, and I heard of several openings at Argonne, and applied. They hired someone else. Applied. They hired someone else. I applied for my job 3 times. So perseverance is important here. If at first you don't succeed, there's a really good chance it's not about you. You know, just keep trying, especially with job applications and the sort of economic place that we're currently in. But to go more into your question about educational background, I did decide to go to grad school. For me, it was a personal goal to get my master's degree. And so I did that through an online program so that I could keep working full time and then also work towards my master's degree. Depending on what a person would like to do with GIS, there's a whole host of jobs. If you want to be an analyst like me, where you're using data for more complex problem solving and more I don't know, sort of the higher level spatial analyses, I would say that at least a bachelor's degree, if not a master's degree in GIS, would be helpful, just because it will give you more of the experience that you need, especially if you're interested in something like the software development side that requires really understanding the ins and outs of Python and software development. But if someone's interested in being more of a GIS tech, like someone who goes out in the field and collects data points for something, for example, whether like a surveying company or a construction company, or even like a municipality, like a public works department, those skills are definitely obtainable through classes at community college, and a lot of local community colleges now have certificate programs. So even if you have a set career path and you think it's something that is would be beneficial to what you're currently doing. For example, I have a lot of colleagues who either work in ecology or archaeology, and part of their schooling now just includes GIS classes, because basically everything is spatial. And so being able to collect spatial data when you're collecting observational data is very important. You can be involved in the field with varying levels of education. It's not something that, if it's a dream of yours, you're going to have to get a PhD in order to be successful. And I think that's also funny when I said if it's a dream of yours, because no small child out there is like, I want to be a GIS analyst when I grow up. That was for sure not me. I want to make maps when I grow up.
Yeah. So the library does these Meet the Maker videos to tie into Women's History Month and International Women's Day. This year's campaign for International Women's Day is Embrace Equity. Are there ways that you're using your work at Argonne to promote equity?
Yes, there are several, and I love this question. I think one way is through the project that I have already talked about, Crocus, because there's, like I said there earlier, there's a huge focus on environmental justice and energy equity, and I was very excited when that project was funded, because that's just been a personal interest of mine for a long time, since I first learned about environmental justice when I was in college, in undergrad. It's been something that's important to me to be cognizant of, and something that I like to talk about a lot when I talk about GIS, because there's a good number of resources out there for people if they're interested in that sort of thing. A little bit closer to home and like less obtuse than that is personally, I've done a lot of work at Argonne trying to promote Argonne and STEM to women and people from underrepresented backgrounds. And by that, I mean people who are, maybe underrepresented in the STEM fields. For example, there are 2 events that I've chaired and been a part of for quite a few years. The first one is Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day that we just had a couple of weeks ago. And the second one is Science Careers in Search of Women. And those are 2, each one is a day-long conference for young women. We've got middle school and high school, and both are hosted and run by the Women in Science and Technology program at Argonne. I've also done a lot of volunteer work for Argonne educational programs department. They put on also a ton of seminars and field trips and camps for students year round, because I think that we do have a responsibility to bring opportunities to students who have not been able to access them before. And that's one of the ways that we're actually going to get more people who have not been represented previously into STEM fields.
I love to hear that, especially since it's so closely related to like what we're trying to do with these maker videos, and just like opening that world up for people who unfortunately sometimes don't get exposed to those careers and those opportunities. Well, thank you, Emily, for joining us for today's Meet the Maker. I know I enjoyed hearing about your career as a GIS analyst, and I hope our patrons did as well. For anyone who's interested in learning more just about Argonne, we have a link to their main page in the description. We also have a link to the Crocus project that Emily is working on if you want to learn more about that project. And then we do have a link for Argonne's community page if you want to get connected with Argonne, take a tour, attend an educational program, or just learn more about Argonne's outreach initiatives. Again, thank you so much, Emily, for joining us, and have a nice day.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
I'm glad to hear that.